Welcome back, folks. Today's discussion really dives into some provocative territory, challenging like the very roots of Christianity. It questions whether the real founder isn't the historical Jesus at all, but the Apostle Paul.
Yeah, that's a bold angle indeed. So we're exploring the idea that Paul's writings essentially redefine who Jesus really is.
Exactly. See, Carrier and other scholars point out that Paul's epistles, written in the 50s CE, don't mention any of the iconic details we associate with Jesus. No birth story in Bethlehem, no baptism by John, no miracles or parables.
Right. So instead, what do Paul's letters emphasize?
Well, Paul talks about Jesus as being revealed through visions, as a heavenly figure, not a man known through personal contact. It's like he's describing a cosmic entity rather than a historical figure walking around on earth.
Yep, that's a huge shift in perspective. Interesting. So, in Paul's view, the gospel was something long hidden being, like suddenly unveiled in his time, not something fresh out of a recent earthly event.
Exactly, and that's one of the central puzzles. Paul even says in Romans 16 that the gospel was revealed now, which suggests it had been secret for ages. How does that jibe with the idea of a man who was crucified just a few decades earlier?
It certainly makes you wonder if what was being preached was more visionary than a recounting of historical events.
Right, and Carrier's argument pushes us even further. He suggests that the later gospel writers, here we are talking about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were more or less crafting theological allegories. They added details, like a mother-disciple's dramatic trial scenes, that simply don't appear in Paul's early accounts.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. So are we, in a way, considering that the historical Jesus may have been more of a divine revelation than a flesh and blood preacher?
Yes, that's precisely it. Carrier's minimal Jesus myth theory posits that in the earliest Christianity, Jesus was seen as a heavenly being. According to Paul, it wasn't so much about a personal encounter with a man, but a cosmic revelation
That's
of a
fascinating.
divine presence.
Now, that makes Paul's role even more intriguing. If he was just passing on what he received in a vision, does that make him more a creator of the doctrine than a mere follower?
Absolutely. His writings indicate that he was a sort of doctrinal architect. He wasn't recounting firsthand experiences of an earthly Jesus. Instead, he was transmitting like a message directly from a heavenly source. It's almost as if he was the first brand manager for what later became detailed in the Gospels.
Right. But then, isn't it a bit odd that none of the details, like the miracles or teachings, are supplied by Paul? Wouldn't that leave a lot of gaps for believers?
Good point. It does leave gaps, and one explanation is that these details were, later on, elaborated into full narratives by those writing the Gospels. These writers, unburdened by the original revelation, might have, retroactively constructed a history filled with energetic adventures and miracles.
So, you're saying that the narrative of a human Jesus, complete with all those vivid events, was a kind of theological backfill?
Precisely. It's like, imagine if you had an abstract painting and then later someone adds literal figures into it. The cosmic vague idea is made concrete. And Carrier even notes that these gospel narratives appeal to Old Testament symbolism, like comparisons with Jonah or Moses.
Yeah, I get that. That really flips the script, doesn't it? But here's something I wonder. Doesn't this view, despite its provocative nature, risk downplaying some historical anchors? What about critics like Bart Ehrman, who argue that Jesus was a real person, a failed apocalyptic preacher even if his biography was limited?
That's a fair critique. And yeah, Ehrman does maintain that Jesus was historical. However, even he acknowledges that Paul gives us very little in the way of concrete historical detail. It's just that for Ehrman, the scarce details are enough to tip the scales toward a historical existence.
Interesting. Right. So, on one hand, we have a group of scholars arguing that Paul's Jesus is a revealed cosmic figure, and on the other, mainstream scholars insisting on a historical man. It's like we're standing at a crossroads of interpretation.
Exactly. It becomes a debate about how we interpret early Christian writings. Do we read Paul's epistles as literal history or as a symbolic visionary narrative that was later humanized
That's the
by
core
the
issue,
gospel
yes.
writers?
And isn't it intriguing how even the process of naming these gospels is so murky? The texts we know by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John only had those names attached to them long after they were originally written.
Absolutely. The anonymity of the earliest manuscripts adds another layer of uncertainty. It suggests that the process of canonization involved, a lot of reevaluation and reinterpretation of what originally was probably a far more esoteric message.
Exactly. So in this cosmic narrative, Paul is, in effect, the one who forged a theological framework that evolved from visionary experience to narrative history.
Yes, and that's the crux of Carrier's argument. Paul is less a messenger and more a innovator, someone who created a doctrine that would later be enveloped in the comforting narratives
Right on.
of suffering and redemption.
I appreciate that analogy. It's almost like Paul was the original storyteller, crafting a myth that, over time, would ground itself in the reality of everyday life.
Exactly. It's like he was setting the stage with a cosmic blueprint, which later writers filled in with the details to make it more relatable for believers.
That paints quite the picture. Yet I do have to ask, by favoring this view, aren't we risking the dismissal of any historical truth? How do we balance myth and history, especially in matters as sensitive as religious origins?
That's a really valid question. See, while it's tempting to, think of myth solely as fiction, in many religious traditions, myth operates as a means of conveying deep truths that are beyond mere historical fact. The cosmic Jesus in Paul's vision may not have fit our modern idea of history, but it captured an experience that was powerful enough to spawn a whole religious movement.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's almost like we're choosing between a historical recounting and a metaphorical symbolic truth. And both might hold meaning, depending on, what you're looking for.
Exactly. That's why these debates are so enduring. They force us to ask, did Christianity begin as a literal chronicle of events, or was it birthed as an inspirational vision that later took on...
Right, it's a profound question, and it really highlights the divide between how we construct history versus how we create meaning. If Paul's account is more about doctrinal revelation, then isn't it fair to say that he, intentionally or not, crafted the very backbone of what would become Christian theology?
Yes, absolutely. It casts Paul not just as a messenger, but as a master architect of a belief system. When he says things like, I received from the Lord, he's deliberately distancing himself from any notion of firsthand human observation.
That's a sharp observation. Yet there's a risk there, isn't there? I mean, if we lean too heavily into Paul's visionary account, we might blur the lines between inspiration and invention. What if some details actually did come from, a real historical figure?
That's a solid critique. It's important to note that while scholars like Carrier and Price support the minimal myth position, many others caution that there's still a sliver of historical data, however scant, that points to a real man. It's a balancing act between mythic interpretation and historical...
Balance is key. And it seems that in many ways, this conversation isn't just academic. It touches on deeper questions of faith, tradition, and identity. What do we choose to hold as true? And what do we reframe as metaphor?
Absolutely. It's a challenging call to re-examine long-held beliefs and to recognize that our understanding of the past is rarely black and white. Instead, it's often a tapestry of interpretations woven together over time. Right,
that's so true. So as we wrap up, I guess the big takeaway is that whether you view Paul as the visionary founder or see him as a transmitter of an already historical figure, the conversation itself pushes us to keep questioning and rethinking.
Exactly. It's all about challenging assumptions, exploring alternative perspectives, and being open to the idea that our origins might be wrapped in layers of myth as much as in history.
Indeed. And that's what makes this exploration so invigorating. The blend of rigorous scholarship with the radical reimagining of a tradition that's been accepted for centuries.
Well said. Whether you lean toward a historical Jesus or a cosmic revealed figure, it's this kind of inquiry that keeps the discussion alive and constantly evolving.
Absolutely. Thanks for this deep dive. It's been quite a roller coaster through ancient texts and theological reinterpretations.
My pleasure. And remember, keep questioning, keep probing those narratives, because understanding often begins
Right,
with
and
doubt.
that's what truly fuels discovery. Until next time, folks, stay curious and don't be afraid to challenge the old stories.
Exactly. Thanks for tuning in, and let's keep pushing the boundaries of what we think we know.